Thank you for joining us today. We have with us Dr. Patrick Quaid, who's an optometrist at the ViewCube Therapy Clinics in Guelph in North York, Ontario. He's an author, and we have another author with us today as well, Elaine Uskoski, who is an author, speaker, and coach, and she's a special interest in the areas of video gaming addiction. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Elaine, tell us a little bit about your story and your first book, Seeing Through the Cracks.
I wanted to write a book on the transition between parenting your child and parenting your adult child, which is what Seeing Through the Cracks was intended to be. And before I wrote it, I'd received an SOS from my son who was at university and discovered that he was severely addicted to video games and failing in school. So I included it in the story because now I have an adult child also who has an addiction. At the end of the story, it's not resolved. He's still addicted. We're still struggling, but that's not what the book was about, so I left it at that. It ended up becoming a video gaming addiction book because that was published in 2017, where that was a fairly new addiction, and there wasn't a lot written about it. People were pretty excited that there was a shared experience. So that led me to speaking and eventually coaching.
Great. Dr. Quaid, how does your work interface with the kinds of things that Elaine has seen?
Well, I think it was interesting because, you know, when myself and Elaine first met, I think the discussion really centered around, you know, when we see children who are struggling in school and struggling with academics and grades, they tend to gravitate towards environments where they can feel more accepted or part of a community. And I think that's where, you know, whenever there's any form of addiction, whether it's gaming or any other type of addiction, typically it's an escapist behavior. I'm trying to get away from something that I'm not coping with, or I'm not fitting in with, you know, where I currently am in life. And I think that's kind of where the discussion started between us, and we started to dig deeper. And to Elaine's point, I mean, at the end of the first book, you know, it wasn't resolved. So that's kind of where her second book came from. So I was in the process of writing my book, Learning to See, Seeing to Learn. So I think we're both kind of going through our journeys on our first book kind of at the same time. And I think it was interesting when Elaine brought up, you know, what she'd gone through with her son. I mean, what we tend to see in the clinic is there's a lot of parallels between what she told me versus what I was hearing from a lot of the parents in our clinics in terms of behaviors in these kids when they got older, you know, they started to get into their teens and their late years. So that's kind of where the conversation first started between the two of us.
What connection do you see, Elaine, as you think about the work that Patrick's done and what you've learned about it?
Well, there was a lot of gaps in my son's education where he just didn't feel like he fit in the system. School wasn't working for him. He was struggling with reading. You know, the teachers would say to me, I could ask him orally all the questions and he could answer them. But when it came to putting it on paper, he would get stuck. There was like some sort of processing issue. And that continued on. We never really got any answers for that. You know, he'd been, educational testing had been done and, you know, no learning disabilities had shown up. And it wasn't until speaking with Patrick about, you know, how much Jake had gravitated to screens at a very early age and, you know, preferred that over reading, that he suggested that maybe there was some issues with his vision in terms of tracking, which made sense because, you know, he was a kid who I was always afraid was going to fall through the cracks, was thus the name of the book, in school. And so was always advocating for him. And, you know, after we met with Dr. Quaid and he did do some testing with my son, we learned that that was the issue all along, that his vision tracking was not normal, not regular. And had that been found and corrected earlier, he probably would have had a more successful time in school and would have had a less likelihood of gravitating towards gaming the way he did.
Yeah, and I think Grant, to follow up on that, I mean, that's a really good point. But you know, where that natural disconnect comes is, and Elaine and I discussed this many times, it's that disconnect between, but wait a minute, he's using a computer gaming screen and that's visual as well. So how can he succeed at one but not succeed at another visual task? And that's where we went down the rabbit hole of, well, it's a heck of a lot different to track size 10 font on a page compared to moving objects on a screen. Those are very different visual tasks, and vision makes up 40 to 50% of the brain's neural machinery. So if he's found an area where he can succeed visually, when he's used to having trouble in another area, having trouble visually, well, he's going to gravitate towards the area that he can succeed with, because that part of the visual brain still needs to be stimulated and trained. And I think he was struggling in some visual skills, but not in other visual skills. So of course he's going to gravitate towards the area that he's finding, a group of people that he fits in more with. He's also succeeding visually in that arena. But then you take it into, the size 12 font or 10 font, and I have to track and go down the page. And to Elaine's point, I hear from a lot of parents when they say it's almost like there's something missing between the page and the brain. Like if I say something to him or her, it goes in no problem. If I read a book to them, they can absorb it no problem. So verbally, these kids are very intelligent. But when you put written print in front of them, it's almost like they just get super frustrated really quick. They want to disengage really quick. It almost looks like an ADHD type behavior, where they don't want to honk around. They want to do anything else but read. And a lot of my parents, the phrase I hear from a lot of them is, my kid is smart with everything except school. I don't know what's going on. Like they're really intelligent to speak with. They can take an idea and go into depth with it, but something falls apart when you put written print in front of them. And I don't know what it is, right? And I think that's where the disconnect with the visual skills is.
And Jake was always interested in stories, but he would always say that video games was a great means for great storytelling, because he wasn't getting that from books. So it wasn't that he wasn't interested in reading because he had no interest in stories. He still very much wanted to have stories in his life, but gaming was providing that in an easier way for him.
And I think an earlier version of that is, the kids who like to read the comic book, but not like to read the textbook. And it's the similar idea, whereas now it's almost like the comic book has turned into gaming, and it's easier for these kids to succeed in that arena. So that's a really, actually, now I think of it, that's a really good way of talking about it.
Well, that is actually the way I taught Jake how to read, because he did not want to read chapter books. So we introduced him to the Far Side cartoons, because he had an advanced sense of humor. And then he was reading Calvin and Hobbes, and that was easier for him than to get a whole chapter book and try to read it.
Yeah.
We've been enjoying conversation with Elaine Uskoski, who's an author, speaker, and coach, and her interests in the area of video gaming addiction have been very helpful for us to hear today. We're also speaking with Dr. Patrick Quaid, who's an optometrist with the ViewCube Therapy Clinics in Guelph and North York, Ontario. He's the author of the book, Learning to See, Seeing to Learn, Vision, Learning, and Behavior in Children. Thank you both for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.